A very warm welcome to you all. Welcome to Designing Cities for All.
The 2-year activity program of Pakhuis de Zwijger.
In which we take a deep dive into designing products,
places and systems for all.
At every level, we can see certain communities being marginalized, being taken advantage of, and it's all part of the design.
When you're neurodiverse, you're in a world that isn't designed for you.
We're not the only species on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
The city needs to be also a city for the other species.
And we need to do something because the old structures in which we worked don't work.
Things won't change just if we just let things happen.
Instead of saying, what can we do to mitigate the impacts? We need to start asking ourselves, what is causing that?
Design is political, that we need to design processes, that we are all different, but there are things that unite us.
These are the things that need to be on the table, that need to be recovered in order to redesign the society.
Everything around us was once designed and can therefore be redesigned.
How do we teach design in a way where students can be really critical of the systems of power that have informed and dominated design?
Inclusion happens by design or not at all.
I think it's always some kind of a co-creation process, and you have to make very little steps and then figure out together what works and what doesn't.
it takes as much time to do something good as it takes time to do something bad.
All design tells a story.
But there's also a bit of a need to not just write ourselves into the past, but also kind of write ourselves into the future.
I invite you so much to join my path of liberation, and I'm hopefully being welcomed by your path of liberation.
We have to heal collectively. We have to help each other understand some of these constructs that actually divide us.
Not fitting in was a blessing, or I would have turned out just like you.
Yes. Welcome everyone here in the room, but also everyone watching online, live or maybe at a later moment. My name is Dimfie Brown, and I would love to welcome you to a new episode of Designing Cities for All. And Designing Cities for All is the 2-year activity and research program of Pakhuis de Zwijger, in which we take a deep dive into designing products, places and systems for all. And actually now it's 2023 and we started a whole new round of Designing Cities for All series. And we're here in a new year and we have a central theme, which is regenerative design. And we're not going to investigate these cities for all just with our own team, but with a whole group of designers, researchers, storytellers, artists, scientists, you name it, and also with you. So I'm really happy to see you all here in Pakhuis de Zwijger on this Monday evening. Today we have a new series, and it's actually a triptych. Every edition we also invite a few fellows to help us explore certain concepts within this topic of designing cities for all. And today with me is Roberto Rocco, sitting on my right. Hello.
Hi.
A little introduction applause, please. Associate Professor of Spatial Planning and Strategy at the TU Delft. Not your first time here at Designing Cities for All, so I would love to welcome you back. They actually ask you like, okay, you said so many interesting things the years before. Would you love to explore a theme, a concept a little bit longer with us? And you said yes. I'm really happy for that. But you're not the only one sitting here at our table, because we also asked some other speakers to join you. Unfortunately, Redouan Boussaid was supposed to be here as well. He is sick. Redouan, take care, beterschap. But luckily we have some other guests sitting here at the table, which is Max de Ploeg, a community builder, and talking about a interesting housing project he is participating. So Max, welcome. Also, artist and activist Repelsteeltje. And we also have a guest joining us online, and that is Nanke Verloo, all the way from Colombia. Nanke, are you there? Just checking doing a check-in.
I am.
Yes.
Yes,
We also see.
I'm here.
Yes. Hello. We
Hello.
everyone's saying hi here in the room at Pakhuis.
Thank you.
We will get back to you all later. Maybe Roberto, it's good to do a short introduction. I'm actually forgetting some people because it's not only the people here in the room, but also I just mentioned some people online. So if you're watching and you're watching this live, you can join us, by the way, by asking questions. Go to menti.com and you can enter the code. That's 2444500. And also for you, if you are want to join the conversation or you have a question, it's a little bit dark in the room, so if you can raise your hand really high, we can see it, and then I will take that in as well. But Roberto, I just said, Associate Professor of Spatial Planning and Strategy at TU Delft. When we ask you to join us, you immediately said, like, okay, I have the perfect team to put on the table here and to explore with the guests that we're inviting. What was the theme?
Well, I think I started with the commons. I wanted to discuss how the commons has this incredible potential to challenge the market as the only mediator between people and the planet. I think we live in a world where a lot of people believe that the market is sacred or that it really dictates how people should live. A very good question to reflect upon is, if a person cannot afford a house, do they have the right to be in the city? And I think they do, but the market doesn't. So how do we negotiate that idea? And I think the Commons has this enormous potential, as we are going to see with our examples here today, to challenge that logic.
Mm-hmm.
And to start with, the Commons is a wonderful idea, and it roots the idea of sustainability, I think, because if we think of the planet as our big commons, then the market rules don't make sense anymore. But in reality, there is a market, there are countries, there are borders, and we need to challenge those things. But how do we do it? And I think a lot of people put a lot of faith in participation, and participation is the key to everything. We need to make people participate in the political processes that govern our cities. But we shouldn't be naive. There is conflict in participation. We should look for that conflict and use it as a springboard to build consensus or to negotiate or to make it a naked, how can I explain? To unveil the power imbalances, right?
Yeah.
Unveil the conflict, and once the conflict is on the table, well, at least we can talk about it.
Yeah, that's why we named this first episode of this triptych Naked Conflict.
Mm-hmm.
Immediately when we said regenerative design, it's mostly we think of design that doesn't have too much impact on our planet, but it involves so much more. You look at it also from a sort of sustainability perspective, where you always put justice at the forefront.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, a lot of people, when I'm talking about justice, they say, well, but justice is such a personal feeling. I feel justice and I feel injustice. But that's not the kind of justice I'm talking about. Justice really it's the pillar of sustainability. If we don't have justice, we are not going to have sustainability. That's why the European Union has put like 1.3 billion euros into the just transition, because they understand that if people don't feel that their interests and their wishes and their will is being respected and that decisions are just, we are never going to get this transition to sustainability. So justice really is the core of what we need to deliver. There is no sustainability without social justice, I believe, because people will never accept decisions that only privilege the environment. And it really doesn't make sense to privilege only the environment. We are part of that environment. But that poses a really big question to us. If we want to have justice between this generation and next generations, we need to have justice in this generation. It's just ridiculous to think, future generations, they will have their needs tended to if we are not tending to the needs of people here now. It just doesn't make sense. So, to those people who think that justice is very abstract, I think there are many very good ways to discuss it in the public sphere, where we can reach agreements, where we can discuss what is just or not, and we can reach little stepping stones to decisions that we have to take.
You're trained as a designer. As designers, as storytellers, as creators, as people that use our imagination, how can we incorporate this into our practice?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think the issue of storytelling, as you mentioned, is central to this. Why? Why is that? We are people. We can only understand stories. We don't understand very abstract ideas. Well, we do understand them, but we have to discuss them a lot. We have trouble understanding numbers and projections and all these things, but we are good understanding stories. And design, in a way, is designing stories for the future. Design is a projection of something into the future, right? And in that way, I am inviting people to believe in that future and to follow that future and to do something about that future to get to that design. So I think design is all about this projection into the future, and that projection is in itself a story that we need to tell people to convince them. Sometimes you tell the story with drawings, sometimes you tell the story with movies, sometimes you tell the story with action by doing stuff and being an activist, for example.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Speaking of, I'm always curious who we have in the room. So maybe it's nice to raise a hand or maybe even say something in the chat via menti.com. Who here identifies as a designer? Oh yeah, hell yeah, I hear here. Okay.
Hell yeah.
Half of the audience. And maybe especially in who's a designer in the built environment, like an urban planner or architect? Okay, 6, 7. Yeah, you're having a few doubts. Anyone else working or being active with our built environment? Yeah. Okay. Is there a mic in the room, by the way? I'm just wondering, like, what are people doing? Yeah, I saw some hands up. Like, for example, the person with the green shirt. Hi.
Hi.
What is it that you do?
I'm a kind of recovering engineer, structural engineer, which is a kind of designer, I guess. But now I work for a philanthropy supporting organizations working on climate and equity in the built environment.
Okay, we also need you. Great. And over here was also someone.
Can you raise your hand again? Who was it?
Here in the corner, with the hat on the lap.
I try to address things via text. So
a writer, storyteller,
quasi-journalist.
Okay.
Organize events, and I think you could also see it as a kind of design.
Yeah, design is a broad understanding. Yeah, and I also want to check the hell yes here in the first row. Hi.
I'm an interdisciplinary artist, so I have a jewelry brand, but I also work a lot with museums, galleries. So I design.
Yeah.
And I do a lot of storytelling, like a lot, but which I agree with. the storytelling is the most important part to the art pieces and how they come alive. So
yeah, you also do that by expressing yourself,
exactly.
Right? Great, thank you. Okay, and who here would say they are working on just cities? Just cities? Yeah, I see some like small hands. Okay, maybe I ask that question afterwards too, and then maybe everyone raises their hands. And who would call themselves an activist? Or has an activist mindset? Okay, also I see 10 people. Okay, just checking. Maybe I have some questions for you later. The commons. What does commoning mean in a designing for all context?
So maybe it's nice for people to understand what commons means. So a commons is always a shared resource, right, in a community. You have a community of people and they have a certain resource that they can share. It could be a space, it could be knowledge, it could be anything. But it's about the shared spirit of it. In the Middle Ages, you had the little kingdom, and in that kingdom you had like a forest, and that forest was called the commons. And that was the place where people could go and collect things without paying any fees or anything. So it was a shared resource. But nowadays, urban commons are really about counteracting capitalism, I think, with another logic of shared efforts and shared energy to achieve or to live. I think the commons is something that is there for us to live together and to that allows us to live. And I think it's becoming really, really something that we need to pay attention to, because some people, they are commoning because they don't have an option. Some people are commoning because they want to share, because they understand this new idea of taking care of each other instead of competing with each other.
Yeah, it's also living with another set of values in mind, right?
Yeah. So we need systemic value change, of course, for the values to be prevalent. But I think the moderately small things that we have at the moment are very promising, because they show ways of doing it, and maybe more people can do it.
Can you name a few examples of that?
Well, I think we have a few examples here today that are going to be explained to us. But, common gardens, common housing, co-housing, for example, common knowledge that people share in different ways with storytelling, for example.
Or more the informal care networks.
Informal care networks, yeah. So I think I actually put a lot of things into the commons, but I think it's a way to really counteract the prevalent narrative of the market.
Yeah.
That's how I put it.
Yeah. How can this concept of commoning, how can it contribute to a more equitable and sustainable urban environment?
Oh, that's such a big question. I don't know exactly, but we live in a reality of conflict, right? We are living several conflicts nowadays. And I think the commons offer the possibility for us to get together, to take care of each other, and to pay attention to each other, and to pay attention to the needs of the most vulnerable people who are generally not heard. I feel a little bit bad talking about all these big ideas when we have here at the table people who are actually doing it. I'm just some guy in a university thinking about this, but I think we need to listen to the people who are doing it much more.
Yeah. Well, that's why it's nice that you have invited some guests. One of those guests is Nanke. And when you proposed this topic and you said like, oh, the first edition has to be about conflict, you immediately said we have to invite Nanke Verloo. She's an assistant professor in urban planning, Center for Urban Studies at the University of Amsterdam, Can you introduce her maybe before we let her talk? I always like it if you don't have to introduce yourself, Nanka.
I'll introduce Nanka by saying that Nanka is the person who taught me the value of conflict. I learned so much by listening to her teach my students, and she was teaching me about how to understand conflict as an opportunity for negotiation and for consensus building and for exposing the conflict, right? So that we can talk about it. And I'll tell you one thing. She once gave a whole lecture holding a baby in her arms. And she was amazing. And I think, she really needed to be here.
Well, Nanka Verloo. Hi there, Nanka.
Hi.
Well, Roberto introduced you a little bit already. And your research is about the potential of urban conflict for making societal changes visible. By the way, you're joining us from Bogota, Colombia. So awesome that you could still be here in a way. I wanted to ask you actually, can you explain how you see urban conflict? What does it mean and what does it entail?
That's another big question, but the reason I said yes, of course, to be joining you tonight. For you, it's night. For me, it's still it's like 1:30 here. Is because you literally named the meeting "Naked Conflict," right? And I'm really triggered by that idea because I always start from the assumption that moments of conflicts, of course, they create tension, they create sometimes violence, they create pain and tenseness. But what is also very important to recognize is that conflicts show what people really care about and what they want to fight for. And if you start from that very almost mundane observation, then suddenly you see that in moments of conflict, there is an opportunity to hear the people who are usually unheard, to see people that are very often not seen in the public debate because suddenly they rise up because they feel that something is harming them or they feel that they need to fight for something. And it allows to finally hear those voices and their stories and to include those people in the solution or the reconciliations of these conflicts.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that naked conflict is expressing that, like, okay, a conflict makes our society basically stand naked. It shows all the moments of pain that are necessary to deal with and to also to solve.
Yeah. Can you name specific examples of conflict that you maybe have studied and how it increases awareness and also increases more democratic processes? Because I can imagine there are a few in different sectors or with different design challenges, as we would call them. But can you give some examples?
Well, I think, of course, I could give you many examples. I studied the conflicts, very small neighborhood conflicts in Amsterdam and in The Hague and in Utrecht, but now I'm studying them here in Bogota. I figured let's go to the country with the longest history of conflict, and especially local conflicts, of course, between different groups here in the country. But I think what is more helpful, instead of giving like these small examples, is to tell you about the differentiations between different types of conflict that I think need different forms of responses. So in my research, I always try to divide different forms of conflict that also demand different forms of response, but also require very different people to act. And I make 4 very simple distinctions. One typology of conflict that we see very often is a moment of crisis. So this is a conflict that emerges very fast and it goes, it immediately demands a response from government, sometimes from police. It includes people suddenly because there is a moment of crisis, could be, for example, the death of somebody or a moment of protest that turned violent very quickly, or different things that could happen suddenly, even
so something that escalates like really quickly.
Exactly. And that demands a response that usually tends to, bring the things back to basic, right? To bring some sort of calm and peace. And I think there, trying to bring the things back to a sort of normal is a good response. But usually, I believe that governments tend to sort of like push down conflicts into the normal much too often. They shouldn't do that, I think, because what is the most important typology of conflict is, of course, the type of controversy, where there is a long-lasting societal trouble, like, for example, the housing crisis or the crisis about the climate right now, or other things that are constantly developing further, and then suddenly something small happens and it turns into a crisis and then goes back down to a controversy. And these types of controversies are usually taking place over a very long period of time, and it constantly includes different stakeholders, different actors. And what governments should do in those situations is to be much more wary of what are these controversies about, which controversies are there, who is really the victim of these controversies, who is trying to be the hero, and how are these constellations of actors constantly changing. Another form of conflict that I distinguish is latent conflict, which is basically a sort of feeling of tenseness, feeling of not really being heard, feeling of being unhappy in your situation. I saw this very often in neighborhoods that were, considered problematic by the national government or by the local government, and they didn't really understand why. And when I would hang out in those neighborhoods and be with the people and sit with people on benches there who would experience that, I found out, hey, there is some tense situation here, there is a conflict, but nobody talks about it.
And I can imagine that that's the most threatening one.
Sometimes, yes, because if that turns into, if it has an episode of crisis, then it escalates very quickly into violence, because the people who are there are already for a long time feeling angry or unheard or threatened. And this is very often about topics that are difficult to talk about. So, for example, ethnic difference or differences in culture, living together in a small space, or about inequalities that are really, not dealt with. So not just financial inequality, but also inequality in terms of knowledge, inequality of being part of the public debate, having your voice heard. So that causes a latent type of conflicts that is under the surface, but when something happens, it suddenly explodes, and it explodes usually, more harsh and more violent.
It's heavier,
and then there is a fourth form, and that is dispute. And this is the kind of conflicts that politicians love, right? This is the type of conflicts that is solvable, that you can negotiate about. This is what local politicians try to push controversy and latent conflicts and even crisis. They try to turn it into a dispute when it happens. And then they think it's negotiable, right? It's about, you get a little bit more and I get a little bit less. And then in the middle, we find a solution. It's a sort of, an expectation to do polderen in Dutch. And I would say those are the least interesting things that can happen, because they don't really reveal any real form of inequality or any real form of tension. But we do talk about them a lot because it's nice, because it's solvable. So I'm always trying to tell local politicians that they should put much more efforts and attention to controversies, crises, and latent conflicts, and try to understand. Try to make them naked, basically.
Be more
try
proactive, right? How can we use conflict? Because what you also say is don't try to solve conflict. It's actually great that it exists. How can we use conflict in our best interest?
Well, first of all, by accepting that there is conflict and that there are people unheard or not treated in the same way as other people. So by accepting that this is the fact, and then also really showing how decisions are made that are better for some people and worse for others. And of course, in our political debates and our public debates, this is often something that we try to either ignore or to, translate a little bit into some language that sounds as if it's good for everybody. But to show really that there are some groups that are, treated unfair or are less well served with the solutions that we make, we really, in a way, escalate the conflict, but we also show what is really happening in our societies. And then that's the start of solving it.
Yeah. I would love to hear your take later on if we also discuss the challenge that we are now discussing. You also wanted to say something, right? Or
no,
before we introduce the topic?
Sorry, I just wanted to highlight that why is it important? Because we need to hear the arguments from those who are wrong.
Yes.
It's important, and many times those arguments are hidden. We don't hear them because people are not powerful enough. They don't have the voice, and the conflict, I think, gives them the opportunity, and us the attention to that argument.
Especially with groups and communities that may have historically been excluded from decision-making processes, right? Yeah. Okay, Nanke, we get back to you after we also hear the stories of Max and Repelsteeltje. I'm sorry, Max. And it's the English. I wanted to say it in an English way, but Repelsteeltje. Question for you, because we're going to use the housing market as a design challenge, put it on the table and reflect on it. Why is this a good example related to the practice of commoning?
Oh my God, you ask very difficult questions. Look, we are... our cities are made of more than 80% of houses. We need to live somewhere. And I think that's where the most injustices happen. And those injustices are generally put under the covers because we have a lot of people who find informal housing arrangements. And it's like those problems kind of disappear in that informality. We have people living cramped into apartments. We have people renting their rooms illegally. It shouldn't be illegal, right? But sometimes it is. And that tells me that we need to expose that conflict and expose the need of people to have decent shelter. And the housing market is one of the biggest tools of the market to make money. So my question would be, shouldn't housing be a commons? Shouldn't it be a public infrastructure? Should we own our houses? How sustainable is to own everything in the long run? Until now, okay, we dealt with it. And a lot of Holland's prosperity came from the housing market. How people accumulated capital, right? How they accumulated money. But is it feasible to go on doing that? So that's a latent, I think it's a latent, sorry, Nanke, I don't know if I'm right. It's a latent conflict that we need to expose.
Yeah. Well, I think we've invited two guests that have a strong opinion about that question. Max, I'll start with you. I can introduce you in many ways as a program maker, grassroots organizer, musician, working on teams like anti-racism, decolonization, social sustainability. But most of all, you're a community builder. And today you are here because you're a member and future resident of the Nieuwe Meent, which is a new housing cooperative in Amsterdam. Can you explain a little bit about this project?
Yeah, sure. And but just maybe to give a brief comment, because the last thing that you said also triggered a thought in the sense that should it be a commons or not, and the injustice that is latently there. And I tie it to why I think the new maint is also important and what the new maint is. But I think commoning is nothing new, right? The commons were already there. It was common sense and actually very common around the world. And it's still very common to 2.5 billion people who actually live in commons outside of Europe. So I tried camping once in the wild in Europe. There was no place because everything is designated or owned and is already...
Yeah, you're not allowed to.
You're not allowed to. So there's 3 places of about as big as this room and you're allowed to just stay one day and that's it, right? And I think for all the injustices, we have to look back. And there's been a huge uncommoning process first through colonization, which is why we're here. So we used to have a feudal system that was implemented in Europe. So you dispossess people and then they have to work for free for the landlord. What is it called now? House lord, right? We pay rent to the house lord. So half of my work that I do, spending the week working for what I found important, half of my money goes first to the house lord, who already has possession. So the whole infrastructure is built on this dispossession and inequality is growing. So I don't know. I just wanted to flag out that if we want to restore, if we talk about justice, we first have to talk about the injustice, and the injustice is the dispossession that created a basis through which I am paying for free to make someone else rich.
Yeah.
And it continues to give them means to become even richer.
This is how we worked, right? We designed it for a specific purpose, and that purpose wasn't the commons. It was other values.
It was uncommoning, yes, at this case. So what does the new maint try to do? And I love to hear your stories as well, such as squatting is another way of commoning, of course. But this one, so what the new maint tried to do, so the new maint, the maint is called commons. It's so that it's the Dutch word for commons. So it's tried to make living as a common. So the market is now organized in a way that you buy as an individual a house, right? And then you own it. Well, with the current system, most people cannot afford it anymore in Amsterdam. So you'll be probably renting and, paying the house lord for free. And what we try to do is then organize ourselves to collectively own a building through a stichting, so a foundation.
Mm-hmm.
So there's not an individual owning anymore the whole building, but let's say the legal entity of a foundation owns it, and you collectively manage the housing space. We've collectively designed it. So the idea is together you have more capital power, let's say, because you put it in the foundation. So you go to a bank, we had, to ask subsidies from the municipality. But the core principle basically is organizing ourselves through a foundation that becomes the owner of the building instead of an individual. So it's also not the idea to sell it for rent or to make off money, because then if you're a stakeholder in that foundation, why would you put up the rent to make the foundation richer? The foundation is there to serve us, to make housing accessible. So it is also a long-term...
so internally you're already disrupting that system.
Yeah, by designing it in a way that it should serve the people who live there and nobody owns it. So there's no interest in paying a disservice.
Or making the profit, yeah.
Exactly. So that also means that the members will not make money out of housing, but we can maybe live there with an affordable price and make it more affordable for the next generations. And the idea is actually that the rent over the long term, when we took this loan from the bank and we've paid it back, then the extra money that we make by paying rent can maybe go, maybe over time the rent can go down, or it can be used to do social projects within the building where there's also communal space. And so you can use that energy instead of supporting inequality to invest in community. So because there's so much rent being paid, now this money can be shipped off to a good purpose, basically.
Yeah, that's great. By changing the rules of the game, you still have to play within the rule of this game because you're operating in a system. What kind of challenges are coming up when trying to organize this in a different way?
Endless. So our building is not there, and that's exactly because it's so challenging. There was no infrastructure to, especially not in the Netherlands, to organize in this way. So, when you go to the banks and take loans this way, it's a new concept, so they're hesitant.
Yeah, this is a drawing of the building.
So this is for now still a dream to be made come true, building indeed.
Yeah, so use your imagination.
will be in the east side of Amsterdam.
Mm-hmm.
What was the question? Sorry, I lost it.
That you have to. You want to change the rules of the game.
Oh, yeah.
But
And then,
you also
so
have
what
to
do you
play
run into?
by the rules because you're still part of the system.
Yeah, so one of it is financial means. So if you organize collectively in this way, do you have the means to actually, fix to be believable by the bank that you will return the payment? So you have to organize that, and you run up against, difficulties there. And then you have the housing context. We don't have the means to, and the hours to spend to, say, okay, we pay this and this people to fix this and that legal arrangements. And so you have to do everything self-organized as a
you're a group
collective.
of citizens.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you don't have the financial the resources or the employees that you can just put on something to build it. So it has to come from the collective energy, and that takes a lot of, so I have to be humble in that sense. I've come in later, so there have been a lot of people putting a lot of work to actually get this off the ground. But these are some of the challenges, that you don't have the time or the means or the infrastructure that isn't there. And then everyone is quite busy paying off their rents in an expensive city. And then you have to do it on top of that. So then who has the access to actually organize in that way? And there's one cooperative who has now managed to do it in Amsterdam, and we might be the second then, but that already says, the numbers already says it, how challenging it actually is to live and organize in this way in the current system. So we hope by succeeding that it will help build the infrastructure more.
Takes a long breath and a lot of energy. Yeah. Because how long would be the process of, like, from idea to realization?
I think
if you're adding up the delay that.
Yeah. So, and I have Hassan as a backup. If I'm saying something wrong, he's behind me. He's also been longer part of the community, but the community has been started in 2018. So we're now in 2023. So that's already 5 years. But that's before that, it already started the designing process, and the group won basically a tender. So the municipality also knew there was a housing crisis. It's quite obvious. So they're looking for alternative ideas, and this was one of the ideas that won. So it was already like a run-up process to that, and in 2018 they heard they won the tender from the municipality. So from there on it started, and then we had to do crowdfunding part. A lot of 250 people have bought bonds in it and invested money in it for the projects to succeed. So there's all kinds of crowdfunding you need to do if you're not a powerful capitalist, let's say. Then you have to pull resources together. That's for our project specifically how long it's taking, and we're in the middle of it still. Yeah.
Okay, so to practice commoning, you need to have some patience. I'm sure you have some questions, but first I would like to go to Repelsteeltje, because you are, also a lot. I can give a long introduction, but you can do it even better. Activist and artist. And I think those two overlap with the things you're trying to change in this world. Can you tell me a little bit about your artistic work and how your activist mindset is included in that?
Yeah. I started becoming activist because I was active in the squatting scene. So like commoning the space. I learned a lot about social justice and this type of topics. And then it really became a priority for me to do activism, and also for my art to support this, basically. So
yeah, because these are topics, actually the experiences that you gained with squatting, you use that in your work as an artist. Can you give some examples of artworks that you made?
Yeah, for the past 3.5 years, I made like an archive of recordings or transcriptions of conversations between police and squatters, or police and activists. For example, climate activists. The took place in like the moment of like the highest moment of conflict. Maybe the Nanka has a term for it. But so this is an archive I'm making, and I'm publishing them as plays. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is one of the plays that was performed in the autumn of 2022 in Mokum, one of the squats of Amsterdam. Mokum Kraakt. I think it was not Hotel Mokum, but the other one, the next one.
Yeah, so
that's one example.
Like you can call it live installations, right? It's performances. You also made a film, a documentary. Can you share a little bit about that one?
Yeah, I recently made a new project. Like 3 months ago, we started to prepare for the shooting, which just ended. We were shooting for 2 weeks to make a film about squatting action, but not a squatting action. I mean the eviction day. It's like a film of like 1 day, but it's a fiction film, but also a documentary because it's based on a real eviction. But then I was like, how do we process as a group this trauma of getting evicted like this? So I was like, maybe I can contribute with my art to like work together with a group of people that was involved in this, and like together we came up with the scripts and we played out the eviction again, but in a way where in the end of the movie we are like empowered. We like squat a new building without effort, you know.
Yeah. When we were talking about your work, we actually jointly realized that conflict is actually the topic of all the work that you're making, which must interest Nanka as well. And what you did with that movie was actually redesign the ideal conflict.
Yeah, like reimagining like a way where we are not totally pacifized, but like, yeah, kind of like reclaiming the situation by telling it in our own narrative towards like the world. Like everybody can see this movie, but it's our story.
Yeah. What is it that drives you in these actions, but also the work that you make?
I think a feeling of like solidarity with my community, let's say, because like this community is like basically everything for me. Like the squatting community, like the people around it. Like without it, I wouldn't have a house. Without it, I wouldn't have opportunity to eat food for free. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, it's like, I don't know.
Yeah, and it is contributing to a bigger story, right? Because
I
mean, you're advocating for increased housing security, for everyone, but in that sense, you can also look at squatting as a intervention on or disrupting existing designs.
Yeah.
How do you look at the squatting as a practice?
Well, I think in the core, squatting is just a person needing a house and getting it immediately. Like it's very, very basic, very simple like that. And it can be disrupting, like it can bring a message to society. You can also squat with the intent to bring a message. Like, for example, Ivika in Wassenaar was like a squat that brought a very clear message, because the neighborhood where they squat this was a super rich neighborhood, and they squat a villa that was being abandoned because the owner was like a slumlord. So like on purpose, what is it?
Neglecting.
Neglect on purpose the building so that he could like make a lot of money from just selling the property to the government in the end, because the government doesn't want a building to like look very bad, and then they would buy it in the end. So like, I don't know, this squatting caused a lot of controversy, but in the end it all came from people needing a house like really bad.
Yeah. You just heard also Nanke talking about different kinds of conflict. Which we already saw that relationship to the work that you make. You brought one of the videos, and it's not the documentary about the eviction, but a reenactment of one of the scripts. And I think this was a negotiation between squatters and police, or climate activists and police?
No, squatters and police, and the police wants the squatters to show their ID cards, but actually you can refuse to give the ID card when you're in your own house and not in a public space.
Well, let's take a look at the reenactment of a minor conflict situation then.
You are simply obligated to show your IDs police passport. From 14 years onwards, when our task allowed that. As you can see, we are busy finding out what the situation here is like. So we simply need to know, and you show it.
But they do have the right to call their lawyers about showing the ID, right?
Yes, that's possible, but it's more reason that to me to get you arrested.
But we won't leave. We will be just here.
What?
If we call our lawyer, we'll just show it afterwards.
Well, that is possible, but it will only cost you time.
Okay, but yeah.
Hello, it's P. About the house piece. We are at the moment talking to the police, and they are asking us to show our ID, but we don't have to show this, right? Because we're simply hanging out in our own house, right? Okay.
It's really interesting that you actually documented these, because these are the narratives that disappear from our archives. Like, if we look back at it in 20 years and talk about the housing crisis right now. Roberto, some first thoughts?
I think I would like to give Nanke the word, because she has this idea about the little powers that negotiate. Nanke, please.
Yeah, Nanke, talking about...
thank
a
you,
conflict made visual.
No, I do have a word for what she's talking about. What I usually look at is the critical moments in situations of conflict. And what she is presenting here is definitely the critical moments between citizens and the state. And what I'm arguing is that in these small scenes where citizens meet people who represent the state, this is really where conflict happens. And this is where power is enforced on people to numb their voice, or to exclude them from negotiations, or to even be violent to them. But this is also the moment where there is this opportunity for power, and for agency. So this is super interesting how she is rewriting the script of these critical moments that really make how we as citizens experience the state, and how we use the abilities and the possibilities to have power in those moments.
Yeah, so that makes our
by
work really
rewriting
valuable.
the script, she is allowing for that to be rethought, to create that type of agency. So I totally love it, and Repelsteeltje, I would love to use your videos in my class to show also to students how this can be done, and how you can really change this relationship between citizens and the state through these critical moments.
Yeah. Well, we make that connection afterwards, but it's great to hear that their work is valued also outside squatters community. I think we can learn a lot from these kind of intervention, but also those communications, because they say a lot. Why are these so nice examples of commenting? Because you also mentioned the squatting is actually a commoning practice on its own.
Well, I have a little bit of difficulty pronouncing your name, so I apologize. Repelsteeltje.
That's perfect.
What I will highlight from what she said is that people need immediate solutions. It's not about, let's fight for something in the future, for an idea of justice in the future. She needs to live somewhere now. And I think that sense of urgency and that people need to have their solutions now is very important to pay attention to in this process of commoning. So commoning, the way that I saw here, is not it's not a romantic idea. It's a really practical idea. And from what Max said, I'd like to highlight one thing. He said, and sorry to quote too, but the foundation is not there to make money. The foundation is there to serve us, right? And I would take that idea to the system. The system should be there to serve us. Right now we are serving the system, most of us, right? We have to pay rent and so on. But I have a question for everyone, also the audience if they want to, and also Nanke. I think there is a challenge in how commoning is organized around communities and small groups of people. And what's the role of government in all this? And I say this because generally we understand government as the bad guy, and maybe they are. If you look at how Marx would interpret the government, they are there to organize the dispossession that you mentioned, and to make this dispossession somehow acceptable, right, to all of us. Is there another role possible? Should we try to change how governments work? I'm saying this because, okay, the small group can fight, but what about people who cannot join or who cannot organize, and how will they live in the end? So I'm thinking we need the big change. We need to change governments. Does that make sense? What I'm saying?
Yeah, in a way, yeah.
Okay, yeah. I don't know if I'm expressing myself, but I think we have small collectives fighting. How to bring this fight to the big collective, to society? That's my question.
What would be needed? Maybe Max or Repelsteeltje?
I have an answer, but I also noticed like the main initiative, but also squatting itself, it's very much an island. It's like a little group of people who like try to do something, try to like pave a way, but it takes a super long time, and it's exhausting, and it's not inclusive. Like in the end, like there is only a couple of people who can live in this building, or like with squatting, it's pretty hard to be inclusive. Like there is like lots of fights about inclusivity in squatting right now. Like it's really not a safe space. Like I don't know where I was gonna go with this actually, but
yeah, but although it's like an interesting example of commoning, it also includes a lot of friction on its own.
Yeah,
and it's also because we don't really have like written rules for these kinds of things, right?
Yeah, and it's just like it's little resistance islands. Maybe that's what I wanted to emphasize, that it's like little groups trying to do something, but it's maybe not enough.
So different organizing in a different way.
You need, as you said, you need to do something.
Yeah.
But
I think also with squatting, it has become exactly what you say, like little, smaller resistance group and maybe even like a subculture, but also in Amsterdam it used to be common good squatting. Like everyone used to have a dad or an uncle or a person, like no matter who you were, where you're from, who squatted as part of making living possible. And a lot of anti-squatting laws have been passed, so the government has been siding again with private property. So what I think, if you would change government, I think the government should become a squatter, in the sense that they do it the other way around. And I think one example that was maybe interesting, I know that during the Ukraine crisis, like a lot of exceptions were made that were not very Dutch, let's say, to be welcoming to new people and like not treat them like in a xenophobic way. A lot of exceptions. And one of the exceptions that they also did, like in some municipalities, they also oblige, okay, if there's empty buildings, you need to make them livable for Ukrainians. So they were they enabled themselves to use the state monopoly of violence that they have to enable basic housing and humanity for a certain group. So I know they can do it, but the political will is not there. And I think sometimes with the latent conflict, like there's a lot of scapegoating happening. So if we look at the housing market, we know Mark Rutte has a lot of, neoliberal policy that is structurally implemented. And who gets in the public discourse, like who gets to become the scapegoat? It's the migrant. Oh, they're taking our space, yada yada, So it's like, I agree, fully agree. We should change government, but it's also just I'm just observing that it's systematically not doing it. But maybe we can use the Ukraine crisis as an example to say, hey, you apparently are able to. I don't know how to make it a mainstream narrative either, that it can become common policy. But I've just noticed, actually, for me, like joining the new Maint is a form of defeat, in the sense that like this whole 5-year process that you have to do it in a whole legal way, while you used to be able to just squat a place like Amsterdam. I mean, the Pakhuis was once squatted, the Melkweg, the ND Semwerf. Like we wouldn't have any like cultural centers, places in Amsterdam if it wasn't for squatting. And now we have to like get burnouts and stuff to make it in a legal way possible to have a common space. Like, so I don't know if we're going in the right direction. I hope we get enough conflict at some point that enough people get the squatter mentality back, and then the government can join that mentality a little. I don't know. Where does it need to go? When do we say enough is enough? I don't know.
Yeah. I do have a statement that I want to drop, but before that, I would love to give the floor to audience also to ask a question or maybe add something to the conversation. Is there anyone? By the way, also, if you're watching live, use Menti. Let me check the code again. Let's put it on the screen, 24444500, menti.com. But there's a question here on the front row. Hi, what's your name? What's your name and what's your question? Or
hello,
comment?
my name is Thijs van Schijndel. I work for the city of Amsterdam, which is government. So I have to first to
okay, first hand.
I'm talking about you.
My question is actually for all three of you, because I live in Zuidoost. I live in Kleiburg, which is a flat apartment, has won an architecture prize. It has been restored and sold for relatively very cheap to a lot of people, including me. And also there's the food forest. There are a lot of projects in my surrounding which like are based on the commons, or people having a shared resource. And even in a little bit more skeptical way, you could say that even private housing, you have a vereniging van eigenaren, like a cooperation of owners. And they also have to decide about in my case, the big flat and certain decisions to be made, which is also commons. However, you see, for example, that the meetings they plan are during work days, and then you still see that although my flat is very diverse, that only the people who make time to go to these kind of meetings are older people, pensions, white people, because they like to do more meetings and stuff. And also in the commons, in other commons project, I see that within these kind of projects, there's sort of elite forming. And you all three have experience with commons, so I would like to ask you, from your expertise, also maybe it has to do with how can design prevent elite forming, but how do you tackle elite forming in like squatting or commons projects? That was my question.
Yeah, so this is, again, the challenge of including everyone. Yeah. Who would like to answer? Maybe Nanka or anyone here at the table? I see your mouth moving.
Yeah, like, oh my god. Yeah, I've been very working very hard to try to make the spaces like safer. Like, I'm also involved in Anarcha-Fem Amsterdam, Anarcha Feminist Group in Amsterdam, just because I am like very interested in the way they approach making safer spaces for people who are not men. Like, when I just started squatting, it was only men in the scene. Like, I was the only person who was not someone's girlfriend that I know throughout this scene. Like, yeah, and then it's only white people, but it's getting better. Not only like the movie I made about eviction day.
Yeah, that ideal conviction that ideal eviction.
Yeah, well, ideal eviction. I don't think the eviction is ideal, but yeah. Anyway, the house itself, it was actually only trans or non-binary people in the house, and it was I was the only Dutch person living there, so that was pretty cool. That was already I managed to get together a housing group that was pretty inclusive, like, which is like compared to like 3 years ago, like it's like, damn, like that's a lot, but it takes a lot of like work, you know. What is the most hard part, I think personally for me, is like the excluding of people, because like you have to exclude racist people for a space to be anti-racist. Like, you have to exclude sexist people, you know.
That's the interesting part, right? Real inclusion doesn't go without also exclusion.
And that's very hard, because like you can work together with somebody for like 2 years, and then it turns out they have like done stuff or said stuff that's like really bad to people, and then you have to have this really hard conversations, and these conversations, yeah, you have to make them happen.
Yeah,
I think that's so. That's my experience, like having these hard conversations, and you have them like all the time, like keep each other awake.
Yeah.
In a sense.
And it's also interesting what you mentioned with that not everyone is coming to those meetings or feel invited or feel urged to be there. That's again those shimmering latent needs or latent complaints maybe that you don't get to hear, right? So you have to be more proactively searching for. Max, I bet you also have something to say about this part.
I'm thinking.
I mean, you're still in a fresh environment and a fresh group of people.
Yeah.
Up for it.
I mean, it depends who you ask. I'm in fresh, some are in longer. But I think when it comes, because of the question of how do you, the meetings are during the day and some people come, some don't, because of can be capability. But I also think we sometimes focus a lot on the term inclusion, and sometimes inclusion is a lot centered around whiteness, in the sense that you try to make a white space more inclusive, and then who becomes the diverse is the diverse other, right? And you try to do, okay, how can we make sure that the meeting, at 3 becomes inclusive for the other to be able to participate? And I think sometimes maybe it's not about inclusion, but autonomy, or like autonomy for the groups to organize differently at different tables, and that you redistribute resources. So it's more about, are we even seeing that there's already work done and meetings being done outside of the one particular meetings that we're centering, that we try to make more inclusive? Because I also think when I talk to some people who live and do projects in southeast of Amsterdam, they feel not recognized, that they've already been doing a long time a lot of work, but don't get valued in the same way because they've maybe not been visible through certain meetings or certain networks. So I also think it's about recognizing sometimes the work that is already being done and investing in that without trying every time to center the center and to make that inclusive. I don't know if that's like if it makes sense. But I think that that's also part of the problem of government, that it understands one world, and that is a certain, heteronormative, white, etc., capitalist world. But it's not able to facilitate other worlds to exist with other rhythms, other logics, and it doesn't make space for that. So now it's really working really hard to make inclusive something else. I don't know. If someone, and then it's also a question for the audience, can someone mention an institution, like a proper white problematic colonial institution that has become something else, that transformed something out through inclusion policies? Or, I don't know, if there's an example, and how do we get there? Or can we maybe invest in new initiatives or decenter what is the center? So I'm also looking...
I think actually this is a great starting point. Like if we look at it as a design challenge for designers or creators, and in that sense, I'm calling a lot of people a designer right now, to have that as a starting point. And I think that is more about like really redesigning instead of almost adding.
I think this challenge is really central. There is a lot of talk about participation and how we make people participate and so on. So the whole problem is this romantic idea about participation. First, I think a lot of people, they don't wait to participate. They go and they are insurgent, right? They go and they grab it, and a little bit like you squatting and saying, "Wow, I need a place to live now." I think that's kind of an insurgent way of doing things. And then when Max was speaking, I was thinking, okay, it's always about the spaces of power making space for other people. And is this going to work? Is this how we want it to happen? Of course, we need to design ways to allow people to participate, but we need to, going back to Nanka, I think she should speak.
I saw Nanka want to react to this, as well.
Going back to her idea of conflict, where can we identify the instances where the conflict is naked, and that we can identify also the actors that are relevant in that conflict, and give them attention. Nanka,
I saw you also raising a hand.
Yeah, I think that is very important to mention that on both sides, because Roberto asked this question about government, right? On both sides, government and society, they are not homogeneous, right? So we are looking for ways to make it more diverse and inclusive. That should happen on both sides. So on the one hand, we have to look for the things that are not only invited to take place, like participation, but that are already taking place. And of course, when you look at conflict, once the conflict is naked, the second thing is to not just look at what you found, but to look further, because there are always people who are not active yet, or who are doing things informally that we don't see. So in many participation processes that I study, in which people are in the end in a conflict with the municipality who invited them to participate, there are always groups who were not taking part in the official process, but they were taking part around the official process, and they were doing many things.
Yeah, in informal networks. Yeah.
Exactly. So looking at what is happening in neighborhoods, in small spaces, even in bingo clubs or in, informal places or in the church, that is where also people are participating and trying to turn our society into something else. So broadening the perspective of participation, and then seeing also recognizing other forms of active citizenship, and not only the things that we expect people to do. That would also make the group of active citizens, so to say, much broader, because then many more people are in fact participating in our society. But at the same time, I think in this conversation, we should also do that to the side of the government, because you cannot say we have to change the government in general. You have to be more specific. There is municipal governments, there is a national government, there is a province, there are people in the municipality who are working really hard to work in these new ways. And then there are people who are really trying to not have that work out too well, and who are not really helping these developments. So being much more precise and making it about different institutions and seeing also the diversity there helps to allow yourself to find co-commoners also on the side of the government, and to really make a change, instead of thinking that the whole government can suddenly change. Because that, if we want to do something now, I think we have to make allies with people who want to make the change, and this has to happen in small allies, in small groups.
Yeah.
And then you can make things work, like, for example, the people in the main are doing.
But
you are both
any reaction, because we also have a question in the audience, but you would like to react.
Yes, I agree with you, but there is another way, actually, is the way of naked conflict. And when we are going to get to a crisis in which, of course, we can't change the government, but a crisis can change substantially.
But we are already in many crises. We have a housing crisis, we have a climate crisis, we had COVID-19, there's constantly crises.
Yeah, how much awareness do you need, which you almost say.
Exactly. So what I was really totally on the side of crisis is going to change, and I still believe that this is possible. But apparently, the violent crises that we are already experiencing, even with Ukraine now and everything, is still not enough. And what I do see is exactly like you said before, Roberto, is these small initiatives of commons, of people turning the world into another direction. And I think maybe, we can broaden our perspective and really look at those.
And make them grow.
And we see change that is already happening.
Yeah. I have another question here in the audience. Hey, there.
Yes.
Hi there.
This question Roberto asked about the government. Maybe it was also a response on what you were saying, putting government opposite, for example, your great initiative. And also you said, you made some remarks about the solidarity in the squatting group. And my question to you would be, what are the selection criteria for new residents to enter the group? Could you say something about that?
For squatting?
Yes, for being part of this residency, which a squat also is.
Well, it's not necessarily one residence that does or does not select inhabitants. It's more like, if you want to squat a house, how are you going to do that? And like, you have to go to the Solidarity Kitchen, for example. But is this Solidarity Kitchen an inclusive space or not? Like, are you welcome there, or do you feel, oh no, I'm the only non-white person here? I feel really awkward. I'm gonna leave forever now. You know, like, this is how this inclusivity is a problem.
Yeah, a follow-up question. Wait, we give you the mic, so Nan can also hear you.
Shouldn't the governments in general be the solution, and shouldn't a cooperative system you're working on be institutionalized?
Oh, I think he is.
Yeah, I think Max also would like to respond. But
yeah,
you know, it's funny. What has become a real big swear word, because what you're saying, another place where the word commons is very common and common sense is communism. That's the biggest swear word you can ever use. Like, we used to have some communist political parties, and I don't even identify per se with communism, but that is very much common sense. And why is that exactly the most criminalized branch of political belief? I mean, if we talk about discrimination, communism is one of the most discriminated political beliefs, I believe, in the Netherlands. And also, I mean, we can go back into history, like all the persecutions that happened. But these are some of the basic thoughts that helped to have, the social welfare state. Like, people were worried in Europe that, like, the working class would, decapitate them. So you have to do something. And I think that's something they have given us, like some of the social welfares and this kind of thing. And that's why it's maybe not boiling enough here in Europe, because they've learned, let's abolish putting children in the factory. We, reserve that for other places in the world. We can't have communism here because apparently the crisis is just not there yet here, because they've given something back. But maybe, I don't know, communism is a...
I think...
Yeah, so the question is, should it be institutionalized?
Yeah, and I think making, you have one house, you live in it, that's the house you have, and the rest you can give back to the commons. So onteigenen, the government is good in it, onteigenen. So, and for instance, you can make a maximum of wealth you can possess. Like we have more than 1 million millionaires in the Netherlands, and we have 1 million people living in poverty in the Netherlands. What's going wrong? So there's... And also, when it comes to the climate crisis, it's not that it's a human problem. It's a rich people's white-centric problem, because, most of the pollution comes from the global northern countries who are living in a certain way in excess. So it's actually, this inequality is actually killing life.
And those who are suffering are not these people. They are the ones who live in the south. And
the burden is not equally divided.
The burden is not equally divided. I have a suggestion of an answer to you and to Nanke. Why are we not? We have all these crises, so why nothing is happening? Well, of course, something is happening, as we can see, but it's the power of ideology. It's the power of saying, you're a communist, and that's devilish.
Discussions.
And the discussion ends, right? And fake news and social media have a lot to do with it. It propagates this ideology. But the biggest ideology, and here I go back to that idea that the state is responsible for managing the dispossession and managing the ideology, is that we don't believe that we can work without a market. And that that's the only way that we have to mediate our relationships. And a lot of people, maybe not here in this room now, a lot of people still believe that, and they think, well, we can't live without. That's how the market works. What are you talking about? And so my reason why we see all these crises and nothing is happening, it's the power of ideology, really. That's killing us.
We come back to that one later, because I also want to include you in the conversation. You had a remark to the previous question, right?
Well, yeah, as far as I know, some of the former buildings that got squatted and cooperatives that started became at least an institution, and in some parts institutionalized, and are unable at this point to help us in a way that we can. And I see a lot of dangers by becoming an institution like that. And secondly, I think if we talk about these topics of inclusion, diversity, whatever now is on trend, it never includes the people that we actually talk about, and also the people that really need housing are not the ones who are sitting here. And at the new main, we have our quotas and such, but we're still always in the process of it. And I think the transparency is the biggest key. We're not there yet, and it's on our website. We're never there yet. We're still learning, and if you want to join us.
Yeah, and what do you mean with we're never there? Because I always like the non-expert mindset.
I think we're all part of a co-creation. Everybody is an expert. And for instance, when we joined the new main, we didn't know who the new main was. So now we changed it to we are the new main, and we really need you instead of come to us. We're we need new people. For instance, we had this whole idea of building on top of build like a big garden and a jacuzzi on top of the building.
Yeah, because
whatever.
maybe if to give full context, you're also one of the
I'm
future
one of the
residents of
members.
the Mains, right? Of the newer Mains, yeah.
But then the discussion became, oh, but it's 15,000. I'm not too sure if we should build that. It became a money issue. And in the end, we forgot that it wasn't accessible for everybody. So now we just didn't build it because it's not accessible. But is that then the best way? No, it's not. It's just the conversation that you keep on having and the transparency in the same topic.
Yeah. I like that you're adding that to the conversation, because that is something you are also often saying. It's not only co-creating, it's also co-learning.
Yeah.
Right?
There are so many things in this conversation.
Thank you.
The power of non-expert knowledge that we have to pay attention to, right? And I go back to Nanka again. Through the conflict, we can understand the logic and the arguments of those who generally don't have the ability to speak in public, for example, and to fight. Nanka, I wanted to give you the word.
No, I like this is exactly what happens when you make conflict naked, right? Then, of course, it requires that you see all the different stories and all the different perspectives as a form of knowledge, and also the perspectives or the ideas of people who are not yet included, or who are thinking totally differently about what a better solution is, or who even have a different problem definition. So I totally agree that including, there are a couple of things that need to be included in treating conflict as an opportunity, and that is, first of all, seeing it as an opportunity. Then second, looking beyond what is out there to see what you're missing, to see stakeholders that are not included yet. And then third, of course, to recognize these people and to recognize their stories and to recognize their knowledge, their innate knowledge that they have and in which they contribute to the problem definition and then the search for solutions. So, and I think that when you're having these discussions in the main, this is exactly what you're doing. You're learning together to see that even struggle about whether you are able to pay something or not is a form of knowledge, because you had not realized yet how influential that is on finding solutions yet.
Yeah. So that's actually also already a form of conflict, right?
Yeah,
on its own.
No, if you run it like this, then basically every conversation is a form of conflict, because there are always different perspectives that never really match. And this is not the problem. That is actually the good thing, right?
Yeah.
That's why
This is the kind we have to embrace, what you're saying.
Yeah, and this is why we're having conversations at the table with more than one person who will bring in different types of knowledge and different perspectives.
Yeah. Before we go to slowly ending this conversation, because I actually still have many questions, but I bet maybe you also have a last question. There's a question. Hi, wait for the mic, because then Nanka can hear you as well. Hi there.
Hello. This is mainly about design. So inherently, design has more affinity with the task of producing alternatives rather than formulating demands for, let's say, lobbying reform or formulating any type of revolt. So it's kind of this idea that, I don't know, the cooperatives are bottom up and the government's top down, so the designer sits somewhere in that stratosphere in between. So with this in mind, how do we implement the commons in design practices today then?
Yeah, great ending question, actually. Yeah, let's solve it in 5 minutes. No.
Can you repeat your question, the last question, please?
Yeah, sure. How do we implement the commons into design practices today? So if we're sitting in the middle
I have a very short
answer.
answer.
Oh, we do have an answer?
It's very short.
Yeah.
I would say, before even starting designing, if you want to do the designing in a commoning way, you first have to common the problem definition. You have to decide together what is the problem before knowing what the solution is. And very often we just step over that. We step over the problem definition as a thing that we need to decide together.
How would you say that, Rijpelstiltje? I don't know. Because in a way, squatting is how do you say that?
Define the problem. Like the problem is empty, no house.
No, but it is a common practice on its own.
Yeah, definitely. I don't.
Or much maybe.
Yeah, I think maybe it relates as well to what both Harsana was saying and what you were saying just now. In defining the problem, I think often the tables we're on, and you can also say tonight is also the case, you don't have what's the right people, but there's many different tables, and so there's also going to be many different problem definitions in plural, let's say. So I think accepting that one thing you've designed, one common you've designed will not match another context. So how do you, let's say, decentralize that as well, that you make sure that there's different problem solutions and definitions and how you work, so there's different tables and smaller commons, because I think in the end commons happen not in a far away abstract, but in the direct relations you have in the direct environment where you live. That's where the common is actually happening. What I also noticed with the new main, that you have the new main, Sona was also saying, like, okay, where we want to make a vegetable garden or a space where I say we want to open it for the neighborhood so they can also participate in it or give something back as a building that we have. So you can never plan it, I guess, centrally and just put it everywhere. So it would be every time empowering something to happen in its own organic way, in a sense. I don't know if that makes any sense, but yeah.
But also acknowledging that there are needs that are urgent, and I think urgency is a big tool to make people look in the same direction.
Mm-hmm.
Like I look at you, and I think there is a very, very palpable problem that we want to solve. Do you want to solve it with me? Let's go and squat, right? And I think we need to. I think designers should get off their pedestal and work with these crises and these urgencies that are not their urgencies many times, right? It's somebody else's urgency. So how do I negotiate that? And I really like what you said about having different tables. This is just one possible table of people talking about the idea, but there are other tables possible.
Yeah. And we have to do that earlier in the process of designing, because often, I mean, this is also something coming from you. We are eager to design, but you have to ask yourself, what do you want to achieve?
It's not what you want to achieve. What?
No. What do you?
Yeah.
No, actually, it's not what you want to achieve. Yeah, right.
What is it? What is urgent now?
Yeah.
That I can help, maybe, very humbly. Not saying, okay, this is the solution, because that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
I think it's not about.
Yeah, so it's also thinking about rethinking your position as a designer.
Absolutely, yeah. That is urgent.
So maybe you can reformulate the question, how to implement design in commons. I don't know if that makes sense.
Say it again. Try to say it again.
How to implement design in commoning? Because je gaat ervan uit. You're going from you're the one who wants to do commoning. Like you want to do something with it, and you want to contribute to that with design. Like, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Okay. I'm sure you didn't get the full 5-minute answer that you wanted, but you got some food for thought, right? Yeah. Okay. If there's no other question, I'm just checking hands here. Okay, one more question, and then we end with a statement. Oh, did you also raise your hand? Oh, yeah, that's the one. Hi.
Imagine you got a job representing an island that's been with a marginalized community. It's used to be owned by Amsterdam. now it's on its own, but they really relate themselves in relation to the commons in that they live from a common resource. And they are in opposition to the government because they try to limit their access to that resource. And at the same time, I think maybe the government has a legitimate concern for the commons as well. How would you go about reconciling the people and the government, or how would you go about, is this a way in which you really want to expose the conflict more?
So this is an actual design challenge and an actual conflict you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay. Not sure we're going to solve this in the 2 minutes that we have left, but maybe there's someone.
Would you go for conflict or for reconciliation in this case?
Nanke, what are your options?
No, but the two don't exist without each other. So reconciliation doesn't exist without conflict. So you first have to figure out what is happening, and that is basically trying to unveil the conflict and understanding what's going on and what interests people have, what stories, what emotions, what memories, and what future ideas. And only then you can start do reconciliation. This is the same with designing. You can only design when you know what you're designing for and with whom and what these people need. So conflict and reconciliation are two things that belong to each other and are both equally necessary.
Yeah, well, that's almost an answer to the statement that I want to end with, which is also a little bit of a resume of this evening. And I would love to hear all of your reactions to this one. The statement is, commons are most likely to be achieved and or be preserved if we organize and are prepared for constant conflict, because the history of capitalism, as it is today, at least, is a history of enclosure of the commons.
I'm not sure there is anything to react to that. That's true, I think. How can we, my question would be, how can we manage the commons in a way that is inclusive, democratic, and so on, so forth, right? Like in the examples from Repostice, we heard several instances where there is exclusion or there is conflict in that management of that commons. And I think it's important to then look for these conflicts and identify them and try to, okay, what's happening here? What is the real conflict that's happening, so that we can act according. But I'm always like confusing myself actually when I say we can act, and I don't know who that we is actually. Who is we in my own talk? I don't know, to be honest.
You know what the great thing is? Because this is the first one of a triptych, like I told you. And I already knew that we would have questions at the end of this episode. And I think it's great if we can ask them, like try to answer them in the next series. So luckily we have 2 more to go. Maybe a reaction from you or Nanke, and maybe also the answer can also be another question that we can raise in the next episodes that we're gonna organize.
I think with the enclosure statement that you gave, I think that goes at the core from the root of why we got here. And I think we also need to recognize that let's say the enclosure movement and the appropriation never stopped in different contexts. So I don't know, you gave an abstract question, but I think it's very concrete and tangible in the sense you have state and local people in conflict. And the figure of 2.5 billion that I gave, people living actually in commons across the globe. Like a lot of the land that gets sold to mines or monocultures, like the sales of these lands are facilitated by states who speak usually European languages, and not only like you speak English at the state level or Dutch or whatever. it's also the way of thinking and the ideology of the market that is facilitating and that monopoly of violence and dispossession. And I think a lot of these people, no, I don't think so, it's actually the case, they don't have legal, the state doesn't recognize them as legal owners of the land. So they've already been dispossessed by Europeans created nation states. So I think we should give back the commons. So it's not even redesigning, it's also about reparations and restoration of acknowledgement that the land was never yours to sell in the first place. And if you look at the biodiversity crisis, 80% of the last biodiversity is actually on indigenous lands, which only constitute 5% of the people. And it's because they haven't turned their land and resources into McDonald's or monocropping and farms and whatnot. So I think it's about reparations, reparatory justice in that sense, and giving back. I don't even think we should implement democracy everywhere or participation in it. Actually, colonialism is one of the biggest inclusivity projects, if you will, if you reframe it, because we had to bring civilization everywhere. We had to bring democracy everywhere. But maybe there were already systems in place that you shouldn't have, implemented yours over it. And I think one beautiful example, and then I'll close my longer answer with it, of recommoning, which I think that was very interesting between a conflict with the state and indigenous peoples, is actually also can be found in Europe with the Sami people. You had in Sweden, you had the dam projects which displaced a lot of Sami people because, the commons were water in that state, and then some people needed electricity for the dam, but it displaced other people, the local Sami people. And it spurred a lot of conflict in the 80s, and they got now, there were constitutional changes that now you have this democracy and in that democracy they were displaced. But now the Sami parliament, which is new in the constitution, that will decide over their territory if something has to enter. So you decentralize and give the commons back to the community who doesn't, maybe they don't even understand it as owning it, but who were, custodians or, taking care of that environment that they shared inherently with their ancestors and future generations. So I think redesigning a system where you give away the key, the authority that you've taken in a central government is very important in that commoning process.
Yeah, so this is actually a great example of a conflict that led to a more democratic process.
Yes.
Nanke, before we go to Roberto.
No, I think this is, I don't have anything to add. This is a beautiful story, and it shows, it gives a lot of insights in how this can happen indeed.
Yeah. Any last words, Repelsteeltje? No. Roberto, then I turn to you, because we're wrapping up this episode. You're now thinking like, oh shit, I need to say something really well, right?
I am thinking that.
You have 2 more episodes. Process it. But maybe you can share a little bit about what the next 2 episodes are going to be about. Because we were untangling the concept of sustainability from 3 perspectives. One was the societal, the other one was the economic, and the other one is the environmental perspective. What are we going to discuss in the next 2 episodes?
I'm afraid that the next 2 episodes will be a bit similar to this one, because we are going to explore sustainability from these 3 perspectives, so to speak, but always from the perspective of different interpretations of reality, different problem making exercises. Who actually proposes the problem? Who asks the questions? And and what can we do to counteract those prevalent narratives? I think Max, I also don't have a lot to add, because I think Max actually summarized it really well. Mm-hmm. We need to make reparations to people. I'm just afraid that it's too late. We are stuck in this system. We are not looking at other possibilities. There are small practices happening here and there, but I am a little bit negative about the power of these to change.
Are you saying we have to give up?
No. Oh my God. Am I saying that? I don't know. I'm very critical, and I want to think about it, and I don't have an answer. That's.
Okay. Well, let's try to bring some hope back then in those
Okay.
next 2 episodes.
Let's try.
For now, I would love to thank our speakers, Max de Ploeg, Repel Steeltje, Nanke Verloo, and of course you, Roberto. We will be back with the next edition on May 15, and the third one is on June 5th. So that's together with you, and speakers will be announced soon. Also, thank you for being here, for your interesting questions. Let's continue the conversation downstairs and have a drink. Another practical remark talking about accessibility. We would love to make all of our programs accessible for everyone, so we never charge for attending. But if you say like, hey, I want to support this and I want to make that available for everyone in the future, you can become a friend of Pakhuis de Zwijger, and you can give a donation, pay as you like, by scanning a QR code that we will put on the screen right now. Thank you for watching at home if you're doing this live or afterwards. More info about Designing Cities for All, your fellowship, but also previous episodes you can access on the website of De Zwijger, dezwijger.nl DCFA. And another last tip, if they want to know more about you and maybe also your fellowship and the research that is like sparking this fellowship, there's a great podcast recorded last year with the wonderful Aniek van Rinsum, in which you talk about how urban planners and architects can rethink what makes a just city, right? Have a good evening, everyone. I'm Dimfie Brown, and I hope to see you next time.